It looks familiar, but that's kind of the point, because the changes to the EC40 lie underneath the skin. Now, this car used to be known as the C40 Recharge. Now it's been rebranded as the EC40 Recharge to put it in line with other Volvo models. For the 2026 model year, the WLTP range for this car has actually gone up from 550 to 554 kilometers, despite using the same 82 kilowatt hour battery pack. The reason for this is because a lot of efficiencies have been gained by refining the powertrain and the software that manages the powertrain itself, which according to Volvo now makes this even more efficient. However, certain things have not been charged, and that has to do with, for example, the DC charging rate, which remains a peak of 200 kilowatts, which means that 10 to 80% takes about 28 minutes, whereas AC charging remains at 11 kilowatts, which means that a dead to full charge on this car will take about under 8 hours, which I think is generally not that bad. But again, the benefits this powertrain can be ascertained on the road, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Now, if you're wondering why it is that we're shooting at night, it's quite literally because we ran out of time in the middle of the day. Yeah, the schedule to be a motoring journalist can be quite hectic at times. Now, the thing about the EC40 is that this car is, again, very familiar to the C40 that we're already quite familiar with. To recap, the Volvo C40 and therefore the EC40 is actually Volvo's first ground-up all-electric vehicle. There is no version of this car that comes with an engine. And as a result, Volvo has gone to great lengths in order to make this car as efficient as possible. The best possible EV that they could make, so to speak. Which is why up front you have a closed-off grille here with only a small opening underneath in order to allow airflow into the powertrain. The same goes for openings underneath, where there's only a little bit of air breathing or air space down here in order to again help cool the battery, as well as the radiators in order to keep the car in check thermally. The headlights also remain the same full LED units, replete with this Thor's Hammer daytime running lights, and they also have pixel technology, which basically means adaptive matrix LED headlights, so that this car can give you high beam as often as possible without blinding other road users. They are also directional, which means that as you turn the wheel, the beam pattern actually changes in order to emphasize the direction with which you're traveling in. It's very smart, if you ask me. Now, one of the things that I find a bit curious about the EC40 is the fact that while you have LED fog lights down here, you don't actually have corner air breathers, which I think is quite interesting given the fact that aerodynamics has clearly played a very big role in shaping the design of the EC40. I'm surprised that there are no breathers here in order to help smooth airflow over the front wheels, but I suppose maybe the shape was already slippery enough. One thing that I would like to point out is the fact that up front on this car there is actually a little bit of space. Not a lot, but enough to hide charging cables, although as you'll see through this walk around, practicality is not actually that big of a problem with the EC40 despite its relatively diminutive size. But perhaps it didn't need to do much in terms of aerodynamics around the wheels, because the wheels themselves are aerodynamic units as they stand, because as you can see, there isn't a lot of openings to this in order to help, again, smooth airflow all the way over. Now, in terms of rolling stock, this car rides on 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. Now, these are tires that are designed for electric vehicles, and because they are Pirelli P0s, not only do they offer excellent performance in the wet and in the dry, but they should also be quite quiet. Now, as you can see by the silhouette of this car, the EC40 is very clearly an SUV coupe, which means that its direct rival is the BMW iX2. However, the EC40 has been around a little bit longer, and to my eye, I feel that this car executes the SUV coupe brief a little bit better than the BMW, because not only does it have a gorgeous one-bow design all the way to the rear, but also this dual-tone colorway really does help to emphasize this car's dynamic bent. However, as you can see, there is some degree of compromise in terms of headroom, but overall I do think the side profile of this car is still quite good looking. One thing that I would like to point out is the fact that when you walk up to the car, there are no puddle lights on the exterior. You do get lights that appear in the door handles themselves, but for the most part, any illumination out here comes from a puddle light that lives in the door. Now, that's not exactly a bad thing. The fact there are puddle lights at all is relatively positive. However, it is just worth pointing out that unlike BMWs, for example, which give you a light carpet or whatever it might be, this car is just like that. But I do like these. I think it's quite tasteful. Now, as I said, aerodynamics are very, very important for the EC40, which is why you have this swoopy back end with this nice little spoiler down here, which is supported by a set of spoilers up here, again, in order to improve this car's tear away through the air, in order to reduce the amount of drag that is created at the back end of the car. As you can see, you also have typical Volvo taillights that stretch all the way from the roof all the way down the side and help to emphasize the haunches of this car, which I think look really good. And when you unlock and lock the car, it actually does a little bit of a dance to it, which I think is, again, very tasteful, very Swedish, very Volvo. Now, behind this tailgate, you will find a pretty good amount of space. Despite that swoopy roof design, there is a decent amount of practicality in here. Loaded all the way up to the tonneau cover, you actually have more than enough space for 5 people's worth of luggage if you want to take, say, a weekend away. Or, for example, if you're a smaller family, there is space for a pram as well as some more luggage on one side in order to go away as a family over a weekend. However, the thing about Volvos is that a cargo space is not just cargo space. They can be very intelligent with how they utilize this space. So for example, not only do you have lights on either side, which is always nice, but you also have built-in hooks on either side in order to hang up smaller items. However, if that's not enough, you can actually fold this boot floor upwards in order to create 3 more hooks on which to hang more items, and you can actually use this as a boot divider to keep smaller items toward the rear where they won't rattle around. This is just how Volvo does things. In addition to that, when you fold up this partition, you will also find a deep well, kind of where my hand is here, where you can store all of your charging cables. This car actually comes not only with a granny charger, but a Type 2 to Type 2 cable, just to demonstrate the amount of space back here. And of course, if you were to fold this back in place, you have no load lip, and this sort of lip here is also very small, which means that putting things in and taking things out should not be difficult at all. Now, if you need to expand this space, you can, because the rear seats actually fold 60-40, not 40-20-40 like some other luxury cars, only 60-40. But Volvo does claw back some points by offering a ski hatch, which means that if you do need to carry long, thin items, you can just put them through the ski hatch rather than folding down a center segment of the rear bench. Helpful, I suppose. The interior of the Volvo EC40 also feels very Volvo. So the interior design of this car doesn't scream at you. It's not ostentatious like a lot of other new brands can be. Instead, this interior feels very nice. It's very pared back, very Scandinavian. So for example, up here for your infotainment, you just have a single portrait display instead of some massive screen, and it's flanked by a couple of air conditioning vents. In terms of paneling, you have this sort of nice metallic paneling here with ambient lighting, but only in warm white, not 64 colors. And it just bathes this interior in a gorgeous, very gentle glow. It feels very restrained. I like that. In addition to that, this car doesn't dispense completely with buttons, because you still have a row of buttons here in order to control all your major functions, and you have more buttons on the steering wheel, again, to control major functions, meaning that everything that you need is only ever one button press away. Now, talking about this screen, this car actually uses Google Automotive, which means that this essentially functions as its own tablet. As a result, you can install Waze and Spotify, as I have on this, and sign into your Google account and just use the car's built-in SIM card. This car comes with 5 years of free data anyway, which means that you don't have to faff about pairing your phone or linking it up or plugging it in via a wire. The car is always ready to go. That said, however, if you do want Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, it is available, but only via a wired connection through the USB-C ports that live down here next to the 12-volt socket. Which means that, again, if you do want phone connectivity, you can, but you just need a wire. Now, beyond that, in terms of practicality, this car is pretty well catered for. You have a decently sized glove box here, which is unfortunately not lined in felt, but it is of a decent size, and it has this little hook that hides here, which can hold up to 2 kilograms worth of stuff, and you can just hang stuff here, which I do quite like. I think this is a very interesting feature. You have a wireless charging pad here with space on either side, which is large enough for sunglasses, very important to me, as well as another pocket here, which is actually perfect to hold your phone vertically in place, which I do quite like. You have a couple of cup holders here. You have a rubbish bin, genuine rubbish bin here in the middle, which you can remove should you so want to, and it's got this little lid to it, which means that you can always dispose of items quite easily without creating a mess in your car. And behind that, you have a rubberized center glove box, which I think is, again, all very thoughtful. All the surfaces here are rubberized, which means that anything that you put in here isn't going to rattle about, they're not going to slide about, they're not going to make a lot of noise, which is always nice. Now, the door bins are quite interesting because Volvo has fandangled a way to make more space in this car. So by working together with the engineers from Harman Kardon, who created the sound system, they've actually dispensed of large diameter drivers to live on the door itself. You only have tweeters on the door, and as a result, the space in the door card is absolutely massive. You can put laptops, tablets, and a variety of other things. You could put a 2.5 liter size bottle in here should you so want to. It's huge. And as a result, it means that according to Volvo, this car has more than enough space to handle anything that you might throw at it. You don't need a mess everywhere. Everything remains nice and tidy, which is great because again, the interior ambience of this car just feels so well sorted. For example, the air conditioning vents feel heavy and with little controls here which are from knurled pieces of metal, and they feel very nice in the hand. That same knurling extends to the volume knob here, which also turns with a lovely action to it. All the buttons on the steering wheel, all the buttons on the stalks, and the stalks themselves also operate with a nice, well-engineered weight to them, which I like a lot. Now, the other thing that also feels very well engineered is the digital instrument cluster. Now, again, this vehicle runs Google Automotive, which means that this instrument cluster also runs basically Google software, which means that at any given time, you can either have only the basic displays of your power and speed, or you can also have a Google Maps display right in your line of sight. Even better though, is if you use your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto and turn on Waze, or if you use Waze on the central infotainment system itself, your Waze actually displays in the screen, which means that you never have to look here. All your information is available directly in your line of sight, which I think is fabulous. The other thing that's also great is this car's overall ergonomics. So as I said, you have all the buttons, all the switches, all within reach, which is always nice to see. But in terms of adjustment, this seat not only offers proper adjustment, both in terms of lumbar support as well as under thigh support, which is extendable, as well as the ability to adjust the angle of the seat, which is always nice. The upholstery on the seats themselves are also lovely because you have sort of an artificial leather on the sides as well as nubuck or suede in the middle to hold you in place. But even the steering wheel, for example, is very adjustable, so you can move it in and out, front and rear, up and down, in order to get into a perfectly comfortable driving position without obscuring any information through the instrument cluster, which I think is quite good. Overall, I think this interior just feels very Volvo in the best possible sense. Sure, there are car makers out there who will sell you an interior with 350 customizable colors and various other things, but if you want an interior that works well and feels posh, Volvo pretty much has this end of the market cornered. Now, despite the EC40 being a relatively compact SUV with a swooping roofline to it, space back here is actually pretty good. With the front seat set in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, I have a huge amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom, again, despite this compromised body style. And despite this car being electric, the footwells are nice and deep, which means that even sat here like this, I can stretch my feet underneath the seat in front of me so I can enjoy some degree of under-thigh support. And even though there is a very, very prominent central tunnel here, because it's relatively narrow, it means that anyone sat in this middle seat can simply straddle that tunnel and put their feet on either side, which I think is pretty good. Now, just like the front, the back seat or the back half of this cabin is all covered in very nice material, lots of soft touch material about the place, although this is a little bit harder wearing, although you still have some fabric to line the door card itself in order to ensure that everything that goes in there will not rattle about. You get nets behind the front seats, you get USB ports here, 2 USB-C ports, as well as a set of crotch coolers, although unfortunately we have no air conditioning vents on the B pillar. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this does seem to make a pretty good case for itself as a compact luxury car, because as far as I'm concerned, there is a good amount of space in here. I have a decent amount of visibility. That glass roof really does help to bring light into the cabin, although obviously it's 9:30, so I can't show you much of that light. But I do have a deployable center armrest here, which is always nice. It's nice and sturdy at that. And this backrest, although it's not adjustable for recline angle, I can just pull this lever and then the headrest smacks me in the back of the head. That's supposed to be for it to fold. But again, even though you can't adjust the backrest angle, it is still relatively comfortable. Now, because of the designs of the front seats, which are quite thin, it means that even if you have a bulky rear-facing child seat, fitting one into this space isn't that difficult at all, because there's plenty of clearance to allow for a child seat like that. However, one thing that I would like to point out is that the openings of the doors are not that large. They are very wide at the top, but rather narrow toward the bottom, which means that if you are trying to fit a bulky child seat in here, it may require some degree of finagling to get in here. But overall, this is still perfectly all right. One small gripe that I'd like to highlight is the fact that even though the ambient lighting in the front is nice and sort of warm and inviting, there is absolutely none back here. Which means that unfortunately, as I'm sat here, I have nothing to illuminate the side of the doors or whatever, which is a little shame. But at the very least, at least this light here does have a little illuminated ring around it, and there is a little bit of an LED light to bathe the back half of this cabin with some light at night. Just nothing on the doors, nothing sort of ornamental, just functional, which is very Volvo, don't you think? Now, the biggest change with the EC40 doesn't just come in terms of the name, it actually comes in terms of the powertrain. So now I'm going to transport you to about 12 hours ago when we shot the interior portion of this car, where it's suddenly going to become very, very bright. So if you're watching this on your phone, now is the time to turn down your brightness. Now, the thing about the EC40 is that in addition to a new name, this car's also had some degree of powertrain revisions. Now, Volvo Car Malaysia executives will not reveal to me the extent of the revisions to this car, but based on my reading on some of the international models and some of the international press releases, it seems to me that certain refinements were made to the powertrain to make it overall a little bit more efficient. So that may be in terms of software, that may be in terms of hardware, or it might be both. But all I know is the proof is in the pudding. Now, the thing about the EC40 is that Volvo electric cars in general have never really been known for being particularly efficient. However, for the EC40, given the fact that this is a ground-up electric vehicle, the first ground-up electric vehicle for Volvo before the EX90 and the subsequent EX30 and ES90, this is a very important car for them. This is basically the show of force from Volvo to display the fact that it can indeed make electric cars and make electric cars that are indeed very good. Now, because this car is built off of the XC40 platform, it means that ultimately this is still a compact SUV, and so there are certain compact SUV compromises, like a relatively short wheelbase, or at least relative compared to other vehicles within the Volvo lineup. And so that also means that in terms of battery size, etc., they are somewhat limited. But by managing to eke out the better efficiencies from the overall powertrain by reducing consumption and using it in a more meaningful way, it means that you can eke out a little bit more range from this car. So this particular vehicle has an 80 plus kilowatt hour battery, which according to Volvo gives it a range of 450 or 480 kilometers on a single charge. That's not strictly true. With the C40, as this car used to be known, it was really a car that would do about 300 kilometers on single charge, which is not great given the size of the battery and also given the fact that this car's competitors will do significantly more than that. But for the EC40, thanks to those efficiency exploitations that they managed to figure out, this car will now do anywhere between 380 and 420 kilometers on a single charge based on our testing. Now, on the open road, when you're covering meaningful distance on a long motorway run, for example, realistically, you can expect about 380. If you drive the car about in town, particularly in stop-start traffic, that's when this car will do about 420 plus kilometers on a single charge, which means that ultimately the EC40 is still geared as a city car primarily, with the extended ability to do long distance trips as and when needed. And of course, when you're driving this car about in town, you'll appreciate the fact that this car feels very, very refined. Compared to vehicles like the BMW X1 and the Mercedes-Benz GLA, the EC40 feels significantly quieter, it feels more comfortable, and it feels a lot more insulated compared to those cars. As I drive about doing urban speeds now, it feels very quiet and very muted in here, with only the sound of the road stripes getting into the cabin. Wind noise and road noise is practically non-existent. I'm doing about 60 kilometers an hour, and despite the fact this car rides on relatively large wheels, the amount of noise getting into the cabin is still relatively minimal. It still feels like a very well insulated place to be. I'm not bothered by any of this. Now, in terms of the ride, this being a Volvo and therefore being European, it has very European sensibilities to it. So for example, this car is not quite as sharp to drive as say an iX1 or an iX2, but it still maintains a certain degree of body control, because Europeans, of course, appreciate body control because they cover lots of distance, so they want their cars to feel very confident on the road, and that is certainly what you get here. Now, as a result, it means that in urban settings, the ride is not as plush as you'd get from, say, certain Chinese manufacturers, where they like their very, very soft suspensions to the compromise of literally everything else. Whereas in this, the body control is very well managed, but that does mean that the ride is perhaps a little bit stiffer than you'd expect from Chinese car makers, but it's never uncomfortable. It takes off the roughest edge of road imperfections and delivers a cabin experience that overall just feels very upmarket, very posh, very well judged, in my opinion. And because this car has a very well-managed suspension, it also means that when speeds do pick up, body control is very well managed. The EC40 might not be, in terms of its powertrain setup, something that is designed or geared towards long-distance drives, but when you do have to subject this car to a longer haul journey, it does not disappoint, because this car feels every bit the Volvo that it is. When you're out on the motorway at motorway speeds, this car feels super duper planted. All that weight from the battery pack right in the middle of the chassis means that this car has a very impressively low center of gravity. And as a result, it means that when you're going through corners, etc., the car really doesn't move around. It doesn't lean. That body mass doesn't feel like it's moving around the chassis. It just feels very planted and very stable and very predictable. And when you're cruising at motorway speeds, because all that weight is nicely centered in the middle of that chassis, it also means that the suspension does an excellent job of making this car feel like it's gliding over the road surface. Not so much so that it doesn't feel connected to the road, unlike a lot of other cars. Instead, it just feels very confident. And so to do 110, 120 kilometers an hour over a sustained period in this car, it doesn't feel taxing, it doesn't feel difficult, it just feels like a very posh way to travel. What might surprise you, however, is the fact that when you throw this car at some twisty bits, it still manages to hold its own. Make no mistake, this car is not as fun as an iX1. Very few cars are, to be honest. But when you chuck this car around corners, it has the ability to simply hold on for dear life and throw you out of the corner with all the velocity that you'd expect. And so, again, while it might not set your heart on fire, the EC40 gives you a sense of confidence that no matter what it is that the road throws at you, you have everything in your arsenal to manage it. It doesn't matter if it's traffic, it doesn't matter if it's a windy road, it doesn't matter if your sensibilities have taken the best of you and you've decided to attack a B road at 10 tenths. The EC40 will keep up. And so that just feels nice. I do quite like the way this car drives and the way it's been set up for drivers who want a vehicle that is comfortable and posh, but doesn't really take away from the experience in terms of driving and threading this car through corners and weaving corners together. Now, of course, being a Volvo, there is also the other main benefit, which is safety. Now, this car uses a vision-based system, as a lot of Volvos have, I think since the introduction of the XC90, if I recall correctly. And the cameras in this car do a pretty good job at sort of judging distance and letting this car glide along in traffic and, do the adaptive cruise control, traffic jam assist nonsense. That's all very good. This car also comes with pilot assist, which is Volvo speak for level 2 semi-autonomy, and it remains one of the better judged systems out there. It does a very good job at maintaining distance. It does a very good job at managing changes in the driving situation as and when they make themselves apparent. And more importantly, it is the sort of system that you can rely on not only to drive about in town, but also to take away the strain over long distance drives and long distance journeys. That, to me, is all very good. And unlike what you see from certain other car makers, BMW, all the controls that you need are right here on the steering wheel, which means that if you want to adjust your follow distance, if you want to adjust your speed, whatever, it's all exactly where you expect it to be and not buried infernally in some ridiculous menu that will take 5 minutes to find and is potentially very dangerous to do as you're driving along. And then it comes on to this car's biggest gain, as I mentioned earlier, which is in terms of efficiency. Now, I've driven this car quite a bit at this point. In fact, according to the trip, I've covered 600 kilometers. Now, during that time, I have been driving this car through a mix of conditions. So that means open roads, like I'm on now, as well as traffic jams and all sorts of stuff. You do things throughout the week, and so sometimes things sort of get away from you. And through all of that driving, this car has done an impressive 18 kilowatt hours to 100. Now, of course, if you're familiar with vehicles like the Proton E-MAS 7 or the Xpeng G6, you might think that 18 is very high. But in a Volvo, believe me, that is a brilliant number. That's because the C40 that I drove previously would refuse to report a number any lower than about 20 kilowatt hours per 100. And so to be able to drop it down as low as 18 is a significant improvement. Now, in today's driving alone, which has already covered about 127 kilometers, sort of doing filming and dropping off cars and so on and so forth, it's reporting 17.6 kilowatt hours per 100. Again, with barely any traffic and mostly open road. It's very clear that Volvo has done their level best in order to eke out maximum efficiency from this powertrain, and when paired to this relatively slippery, very aerodynamic body, it just means that you're not wasting power doing things that it doesn't need to. It's not wasting power pushing through the air, it's just getting on with it. And as far as I'm concerned, it just feels like a very well-judged package. I can see why it is that Volvo remains very confident in their vehicles like the EC40. Even though the market may have preferences that have steered them away from Volvos, these cars are no less impressive than they have ever been. And the fact that Volvo keeps working on them and retooling them and trying to find ways to make them better with every incremental software update, it just means that with every new iteration of a new Volvo, it just gets better and better. And it just makes these cars livable, easy, and very easy to recommend. Now, of course, the Volvo EC40 does not exist in a silo. There are other vehicles within this space that might tempt you away. So if we focus specifically on the all-electric vehicles, if you want something within this space that might be slightly sharper to drive, there is, of course, the BMW iX1 and iX2. And there has very recently been updated a BMW iX1L, which is larger than this and offers a little bit more legroom in the rear while still offering a very BMW-like driving experience with very BMW-like sensibilities. And of course, if you can't be bothered with any of the established brands and you want your car to look like something that has never been seen before, there is of course the XPeng G6, which I might also be remiss to point out, or not point out rather, that that car starts at about 159,000 ringgit, which is a lot cheaper than one of these. But ultimately, this is a Volvo. And so if you understand the value of a Volvo and the value of the brand and the sensibilities that drive the Volvo brand and all of its products, you will understand why it is that these cars command a premium and why I think that it is justified as to why they command a premium. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2026 Volvo EC40 Ultra. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel, so you'll stay up to date with developments as and when they become available. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Please share this video far and wide, and please subscribe because I'm paying so much money in toll. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.